Okay, I think I'll get started then. Is that okay?
Go right ahead, Kim.
Great, thank you. Welcome, everyone. My name's Kim Havey. I am Director of the City of Minneapolis Sustainability Division. And I'm here with colleagues from our council offices, as well as our Community Planning and Economic Development Department, our consultants from INTEP, as well as the Center for Energy and the Environment. The presentation today is being recorded and will be posted publicly, including questions received. Attendees can submit comments and questions at any time through the chat feature. So if you hover your mouse over about the center of the screen, you'll see that just to the right of the three dots is a little conversation box, and there you can click on that and type in your questions or comments off to the right. These will all be accumulated and put forward into a Q&A that will be either accessible from the website, or you can request a copy of it be sent out to you. If you're on the phone, please write down and hold your questions until the end of the presentation. You can then push *6, and that will turn on your mic for a question. You're also welcome to send questions to Minneapolis Homes at minneapolismn.gov, and that's also in the chat box, but it's MPLS HOMES at minneapolismn.gov, and those will be responded to by staff. So we greatly appreciate your participation and your interest in learning about our new sustainability policy. Let's go to the next slide. So today we're going to be reviewing a new sustainability policy for 1 to 3 unit homes that participate in the Minneapolis Homes program. You'll hear from presenters from the City of Minneapolis, INTEP TE Studios, the architectural and engineering firm, who work with us to complete a comparison of passive house and zero energy ready housing constraints, conditions, and costs. We'll also hear from the Center for Energy and the Environment on how to comply with and understand this particular sustainability policy requirements. Then we will follow up with a Q&A session. Again, you can submit questions in the chat box or use *6 to be able to turn on your mic from your phone and ask questions. So we'll be answering those questions after we've heard from the other presenters. But first, I want to turn things over to Councilmember Kevin Reich from Ward 1. Councilmember Reich has been a champion of affordable and sustainable housing and has really helped us be able to pursue a more progressive work on our housing policies in order to reduce our energy use and to provide opportunities to reduce energy costs and energy burden, especially in these affordable homes that are being constructed through the Minneapolis Homes program. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Councilmember Reich for an introduction.
Well, thank you, Kim, for that introduction, and I appreciate all the work that you and your team and the other divisions within the enterprise to put this forum together, much of which is a culmination of conversations we've had internally, and of course we want to launch those into a broader conversation with the broader partners in terms of how we provide housing and just the conversation in general as a city, how we think of ourselves moving forward vis-a-vis the built environment, particularly this component of the built environment and our energy efficiency goals. As folks know, we have a very ambitious set of goals in terms of reducing carbon emissions by 80% by 2050. The question is, how will we get there? And so much of our policies are trying to create parameters that launch how we will move forward to achieve those goals. The 2040 plan says that we're going to be a growing city, but we want to just have growth per se. We want to make sure that growth is equitable, resilient, accommodates people from where they're at and where we need to go as policymakers, as a city that's trying to meet its objectives. The built environment plays a role in that, and of course today's conversation is a component of the overall portfolio of where we live and how we live, and we want to make sure that we have clean, efficient, and safe environments for everyone. And of course, when we say everyone, we have to be mindful of income barriers, we have to be mindful of location, And of course, today's conversation, we have to be mindful of the actual performance of these structures moving forward. Otherwise, we will not meet the goals if we're not intentional. So I'm very happy that we're having this conversation to move in that direction intentionally with the broader community.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much, Councilmember Reich. I just wanted to touch on a couple of things from the city's sustainability perspective and how the type of work that we're doing for sustainable housing really is in line with the work that we have on our Minneapolis Energy Vision. So within our Minneapolis Energy Vision, we are striving to improve social equity. And what this means is minimizing service costs to residents and businesses and providing opportunities for lower energy bills through efficiency, to control energy cost variability, and to improve access to energy services that empower low-income residents to take advantage of energy efficiency, conservation, and renewable energy programs. We want to use sustainability and economic investment in sustainable practices to reduce economic and health disparities. One thing that we've really seen as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic is the quality of our air and people's overall health is greatly impacted by carbon and other kinds of emissions, and therefore making homes that are more efficient improves both local indoor and outdoor air quality, and therefore can improve the health and well-being of our residents. We want to be able to create housing that's self-sufficient and also low cost. So home energy burdens can be significantly reduced for all residents with new homes, so that our goal is to have no more than 3% of anyone's income going to pay for energy costs. We want to use new investments in technology to expand economic opportunities. So that includes investment and management of our energy system that encourages investment in new local energy related businesses and new opportunities for workforce and job training through existing businesses, and expand economic opportunities and training for residents and businesses throughout Minneapolis. We want to have 21st century systems. That means we need to have grids that are resilient, that are flexible, that are smart, in order for us to take advantage of electric vehicles, distributed generation, the use of smart thermostats and smart meters, and other conservation technologies. A recent study from the Rocky Mountain Institute that just came out last year analyzed the upfront and 15-year cost of a mixed fuel and full electric home in 7 cities in the United States, including Minneapolis. The study showed that the upfront costs are relatively the same for a Minneapolis-built home, either using mixed fuel or using all electric, but that the average annual cost over 15 years is 9% lower for an all electric home. So in order for us to be able to move in this direction, reduce costs, be more resilient, we need to be looking at new kinds of homes being built either to passive standards or DOE Zero Energy Ready standards. And this is really the key to reducing our overall energy costs and the energy burden of our residents. So in order for us to understand locally the differences between our current housing codes and requirements and the cost implications of locally doing passive or zero energy ready homes, we hired INTEP and TE Studios to do a report. So I'm now going to turn it over to Tim Ian, and we can jump into the next slide. So Tim, I'll turn it over to you for to give us your findings. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks to all the stakeholders. If you could advance the slide, thank you. There we are. So we're INTEP and TE Studio. We were the architects of record for the first certified passive house in the country, and we've been dealing with these subject matters here for the last 15 plus years. We initiated a conversation about ultra efficiency passive house and pilot projects as early as 2008 with the city of Minneapolis, and we're really excited in 2019 to be hired to conduct this study that we're talking about here today. In our study, we are comparing Code Green Communities, Zero Energy Ready Home, and the Passive House Building Energy Standard. And I'm going to bring you some of the work that we did and the findings here today. All of it can be expanded upon. If anybody has a need to go deep or see numbers, I'm sure that'll all be publicized here as a result of this event. Next slide, please. Can you advance to the slide that says, why do we need ultra efficient buildings, please? All right, I can't see that right now. I'm just going to assume that that is the slide that is up. So our first question that we're asking to embed this study is, why do we need ultra efficient buildings? And I think ultimately as a society, we need to decide on which track we want to go to do cost-effective carbon emission reductions and sequestration. We need to, as Kim alluded to earlier, leave fossil fuels behind by about the middle of the century and shift our grid from natural gas, oil, gas, and diesel to only renewable energy sources. The most universal fuel at this moment in time is electricity. This is where the notion of an all-electric home comes into play. In Minnesota, we have a significant heating load that is typically supplied with natural gas. Without natural gas, it's extremely difficult to supply heating with only electricity without any kind of load shifting, ideally seasonally. That has something to do with the fact that we're creating renewable electricity, not necessarily at the time that is being demanded or needs to be available for use. So we need to look at how can we store energy. To replace natural gas with electricity, the grid needs to grow about threefold in output annually, but even more so to supply peak load at the time of need. That is a huge ask of our grid, and that doesn't even include using electric cars. So that is a tall order, and certainly something that informed our work. High-performance buildings that address first and foremost heating and by extension cooling demand can readily provide a 90% reduction of that need, making a clean electricity as a fuel more possible. So that's just kind of a quick preface. Next slide, please. So I assume that's up. Unfortunately, I have a little lag on my end. I apologize. So the next slide should talk about differences here. As INTEP, we investigated code, green communities, building standards, zero energy ready home, and passive house in a local case study, and we had partnership with Gimmick, a local affordable housing developer, and by extension, their contractors to help with some of the pricing. Next slide, please. In comparison, we find that they are very different standards. Not all these standards are performance-based. So really what we have before us an apples to oranges comparison. However, these standards, if we look at them, they can be quite complementary, and that's something we want to talk about today. Next slide, please. Green communities and zero energy ready home are, by extension, Energy Star buildings. The table that's in front of you, it's small print. Again, if somebody wants to go deep, we can dive into that in the questions or at a different venue. But the point here is we put side by side these four different models comparing building envelope, mechanical systems, and by extension, the performance. This slide was meant to come later, but we'll get to that in a moment. So green communities and zero energy ready are essentially Energy Star buildings. And Energy Star, at the moment, the way it is written, is an incremental improvement upon the Minnesota State Building Code. We have, comparatively speaking, in the country, a pretty high code, but as far as Energy Star goes, there's not a whole lot of difference in them. One of the key aspects of Energy Star is it doesn't prescribe a specific performance target for the building shell, only a minimum for individual components, whatever that amounts to. And then it is suggested in the zero energy ready home that the difference later be made up with renewable energy generation on the roof, typically in the form of solar. In stark contrast to that, something like the Passive House Building Energy Standard is a performance-based approach that is geared towards an optimal outcome with a focus on energy efficiency, comfort, and optimal life cycle costs. So they come from different places. Next slide, please. These slides here, this one and the next one, talk a little bit about the differences in what I talked about. I think the slide with the tents, if that's what everybody's seeing at the moment, is maybe most stark in illustrating that we're using this imagery to suggest to you that in the status quo, we have a not so great building envelope with a big mechanical system and an incremental improvement. We make that a little better and we augment that with renewable energy, but that something like the passive house standard really presents a leapfrog approach on that is more systems based and looks at what happens under the hood of the building itself. Yep, you can advance to the next slide. So when we look at these design standards, passive house is a very simple and elegant solution. It's basically the winter coat versus the t-shirt or the sweatshirt. Again, other like images to kind of prompt this conversation. It offers a higher R value, lower U factors, more air tightness, and small, highly efficient mechanical and electrical and plumbing systems to amp up their performance. Next slide, please. So on the performance side, what Intep did is we created energy models based on a locally built home, a typical model that affordable housing developers use here in the Twin Cities. We illustrated the differences between the different building standards for each one for that particular building, and we sent that out to the local markets to be priced. So those are some of the design differences. Please keep going on the slides. We then compared the effort that needs to go into it, the performance, the components, the market conditions, as well as cost. And for cost, we looked at first day, simple payback, but also societal costs and societal investment and benefits. And the biggest difference, on the face of it, between these different programs is really in the heating energy demand, which brings me sort of back to what I said in the beginning. That is one of the bigger hurdles to tackle, and that is the biggest difference between these standards in that they don't all address it in the same way. I already mentioned green communities and zero energy ready home are essentially Energy Star. So when you see that in these tables, use that interchangeably, and they provide modest improvements of our code. Energy Star, heating, yeah, please keep going on the slides. Energy Star heating and cooling energy is only about 20 to 30% down over the code building. However, we also found that not all green communities or Energy Star buildings are currently built specifically to that standard. And so the reality is that those performances on the heating and cooling side are generally only about 10, maybe 15%. Keep going on the slides, please. So right here, we stop for a second, that's great. Net zero, typically achieved by offset on its own roof, is something that doesn't readily work. You can see that if you look at the second row from bottom on green communities or zero energy ready homes. The reason why that's grayed out here is because the model we were given didn't meet all those criteria, but we did include it. The seasonal peak load on a Energy Star building is still fairly large. There is still a significant heating load to be conquered. And with that comes a load shift requirement. The comfort is a little bit up from the code building, but not in a huge way. There's some resilience added to the building in that it has a slightly better building envelope. But in some, it cannot be fueled on its own roof, and it cannot be fueled with today's clean energy grid capacity. So those are some of the things that stood out to us in the green community / Energy Star realm. Maybe a couple of additional notes here on that program. Typically, those buildings are quantified using something called the HERS rating, Home Energy Rating System, and that generates a performance number that is not a straight up building science number, but essentially just a number between 0 and 100 to sort of rank the building versus normal buildings. And there's some confusion with that, as that model struggles to capture really high performing buildings anecdotally, and also since it's not transparent, it doesn't really enable to compare these systems very well amongst each other. So we have to take those numbers with a grain of salt. That's why we energy model buildings, and those are the outcomes that you can see here. So when we're talking about site energy, for instance, in a green community setting, 34,000 kilowatt hours annually, a zero energy ready home may be as good as 16,000, and then a passive house we can get down to actually a plus, more generated than consumed in any given year when partnered with the offset on the roof. The reason why I bring up this difference about how these systems are quantified, or how these building programs are quantified, is that it would be difficult for any engineer to design a future grid and good buildings based on a score without the actual loads. So we also need to look at which of these programs can provide us with actual loads, real loads, based on building science that can help inform that. And so that was something that stood out to us here with the passive house standard as it does that. Not quite ready for the financial analysis. I need another minute, please. So on the passive house side, most importantly, we cut about 90% of the heating / cooling energy and about 60 to 80% on overall energy consumption over code. And the passive house is effectively, because of its high performance building envelope, a thermal battery. It is a storage device, which is something that we struggle to make for electricity in an efficient and cost efficient way. The seasonal peak load is small. Load shifting requirements are still there, but much, much smaller. Net zero becomes possible on the building. We have more comfort, more resilience, and we can fuel with today's grid. I mentioned that. And I would go so far, this goes back to the partnership, that the path to a net zero building goes through passive house. In other words, if anybody wants to make a self-sufficient building, which was one of the points stressed earlier, you would have to amp up the building envelope and put in the renewables, and that's where the combination is strong, and that's where a partnership is thinkable. One side note, passive house has traditionally also been a market transformation tool in the places where it's been used. The standard, by the way, is 30 years old, has been used all over the world. And so in those places where it's been adopted, generally for that category. So one other side note, locally green standards are not always built to specification. I think that it affects all programs. So one important piece that we learned in our study and we brought to the city is we cannot be guaranteed compliance without audit. We recommend buildings get certified whenever possible to ensure that they deliver the quality they were set out to deliver. And secondly, the market needs incentives, sticks, carrots, leadership to develop the local talent and capacity. We're a little short on that right now, and that is something where especially projects that use public money can demonstrate that leadership. All right, financial analysis. Next slide, please. I'm not seeing that at the moment, so I'll jump ahead still. First thing to note on the financial analysis is when we look at the passive house program, really additional money spent on making a passive house is not so much a cost as an investment. Similar to a solar panel, we are investing into the shell of a building, which then becomes a thermal storage battery and therefore pays back over its life. And it does that indefinitely and without moving parts. Next slide, please, should show that content. So as compared to the status quo and incremental upgrades, the passive house program costs very differently because it is an investment into the future. By virtue of the fact that we can turn off fossil fuels and replace with clean electricity, it solves the carbon issue to a large extent and is ultimately over its life the most cost-effective approach that we considered in our study. Thank you. I can now see the slide on the first day cost. We should talk about that for just a second. The market pricing that was returned to us showed us $333,000 for an average green communities building, $395,000 for an average passive house. This is with the market not having done passive house. We're looking at pilot project costs. Please also note the idiosyncrasies that the most expensive green communities house was more expensive than the cheapest passive house. So the takeaway here are, in a worst case scenario, there's a $60,000 to $65,000 investment for passive house needed. We have these idiosyncrasies, which tells us the local market is not used to these buildings just yet, and therefore we need to demonstrate leadership, invite them in, train them up, and make sure that this gets better and we can learn from it here for the future. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, I have this delay, so I don't know what you're seeing just yet. For me, the next slide here is one that compares the net zero investment across the different the different pilot projects. What we found in our study was that taking any project code, Energy Star, so by extension Zero Energy Ready, there it is, or green communities or passive house to an annual net zero costs about the same for all intents and purposes. The money between those, the differences are very, very small. You can advance to the next slide. But the benefits that are generated in these scenarios are very, very different. There's differences in resilience and comfort, in carbon footprint, and most importantly, in the grid superstructure, if we want infrastructure to supply them. So there is a danger here in how we set up the study and how we looked at this, because there was a big focus on first day cost. And the danger that we're facing is that the first day cost comparison does not tell the whole story. In a way, it is almost a wrong question to ask, as it doesn't capture what happens down the road. And with that, we can advance to the next slide. So you can see here these total upgrade costs at the bottom, anywhere from 95 to 101. So for all intents and purposes, the same. Let's advance to the next slide, where we get into the discussion around the social costs. So, sorry, I'm still waiting for the slide to advance on my end. All right, I'll just have to assume that that slide was advanced. Unfortunately, I can't see that. So the social cost, of these different programs is very, very different. We have incremental improvements to buildings that do cost money on day one, but they sort of shift the burden down the line. And in this next slide, hopefully you can see it, it should come through that there's a carbon cost to be assessed to these buildings, and that is vastly different between the different models. And then the average load needed in our grid to supply these buildings is vastly different. So there will be a cost of those changes to the grid infrastructure to supply them. And then we still have a winter peak load issue on top of it that is very different between them. So in some, if the baseline and status quo today means we have very high peak load and seasonal load shift and a very high sequestration need and very low resilience, then in a passive house realm, all these things are turned around where the peak load issue goes away, sequestration need is lessened, and our energy resilience goes up at a cheaper cost over time. Next slide, please. So a leapfrog approach can put us on track to feasible and sustainable future without a huge burden, and that's demonstrated currently with leadership in the EU, Canada, and also quite a few cities and states in the US and Canada. And I would also like to note, and we looked at that a little bit, it is a huge opportunity to boost our local construction industry. Construction generally is very local, so the money spent there stays here versus buying solar panels or equipment, which quite often comes from elsewhere. So then the money goes abroad. And so there's a huge opportunity here for a high performance program to capture that. So as a society, we need to decide whether to invest in energy generation, which has peak and seasonal load shift issues and means growing the grid by an order of magnitude, or invest in energy efficiency to eliminate the need for heating energy. The future depends on having a clear path so that investments in the grid can be targeted and adequate. A sustainable energy system requires an integrated system approach based on a clear energy demand plan. And that's what we're setting here with policy, right? We're setting the trajectory for what is left. What do we have to generate after we make these buildings to one standard or another? I'd also like to point out that owners, occupants are generally the biggest benefactors of making really, really good buildings, but ultimately our society will benefit from them, obviously. And so we need to decide here and now, if we're writing policy, whether we leave any energy or financial debt or burden behind for our children or grandchildren to pick up. That's what this last slide here is meant to showcase. And before I part you, I think I have 1 more minute. I'd like to leave you with some thoughts. We would like to see a city where we remove barriers to those who want to go far and make really, really good buildings. We would like to see incentives for those who want to do the right thing and disincentives for those who don't. We'd like to see leadership, especially in projects where public money is invested. And we also would like to see support to bring up the general building code to get in line with our reality and building science, where the current system really just favors incremental improvements, and it will take us an absolute age to see any kind of leapfrog change in the building industry. With that, I thank you for your time and the opportunity to conduct this study. I'm happy to stand by for questions. All our information will be made available. Thank you so much, and special thanks to Councilmember Reich, who's been a sounding board, a partner, an inspiration all through the process. And we hope that we delivered a plethora of information to inform the city's policy making. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, and we appreciate you bearing with us with some of our technical difficulties as well. And apologize to you as the audience as well, as some of our presenters weren't able to join through the typical fashion, and so that's causing them to call in, and it seems like causing a slight delay in what they're seeing on the screen. Before I jump into the city's recommendations for its sustainability policy, I wanted to talk about the program that policy will impact, and that is the Minneapolis Homes program. So Minneapolis Homes is a group of city programs that provide homebuyer services such as down payment assistance, as well as access to homebuyer education, homebuyer counseling, and financial wellness training. The program includes an annual application process where developers and individuals can apply to purchase city-owned land and vacant structures and request gap financing for their development projects within the city of Minneapolis. All new construction projects through Minneapolis Homes currently are required to meet the Enterprise Green Communities criteria with the Minnesota overlay. We hired INTEP TE Studio to conduct their study to inform if we should raise those standards. As a result of the study and the information gained, we as the city, are proposing to implement a sustainability policy for our new construction projects funded through the Minneapolis Homes Financing Program. The current proposal would impact 1 to 3 unit new construction developments by increasing the minimum criteria from the Green Communities criteria that Tim mentioned to the Department of Energy Zero Energy Ready Homes program. The Zero Energy Ready Homes program is a step above green communities in efficiency, as demonstrated by Tim's presentation, and CPIT staff has seen the adoption of the standard by a few of its development partners. The step from green communities to net zero energy ready is an achievable one that significantly or has significant less cost implications than passive or net zero standards. And an increase to the zero energy ready home standard will help the city move on its way toward its carbon emissions reduction targets, while also ensuring continued development of affordable housing. 4 to 20 unit development projects are a new component to the City of Minneapolis Homes program, and no such projects have yet been built. Consistent with the City Council staff direction, CPIT staff, including myself, and by the way, I forgot to introduce myself, I'm Kevin Knase, I'm a CPIT staff person, are recommending that the new sustainability policy be applicable for 1 to 3 unit projects that are new construction, and that 4 to 20 unit new construction projects continue with existing green communities requirement for multifamily properties. Rehabilitation projects would also continue with the green communities requirement. The Zero Energy Ready program is a Department of Energy program focused on increasing energy efficiency, improving indoor air quality, and making homes zero energy ready. The program builds upon the existing Energy Star requirements of Green Communities criteria, which is our current standard. The Zero Energy Ready program standard is intended to allow for homes to be energy efficient enough so that if they include a solar photovoltaic system installed on the roof, they could offset most, if not all, of their energy consumption within the home. The program would require that homes be well insulated, place HVAC ductwork in an optimized location to prevent heating and cooling loss, use water conserving fixtures and energy efficient appliances, and provide a higher level of indoor air quality for tenants within the homes, which not only makes them more energy efficient, but are also healthier to live in, which Kim spoke to earlier. The Zero Energy Ready Homes program would ensure that the city continues its pathway of reducing carbon emissions by 80% by the year 2050. Homes built under the program are 13% more efficient than existing homes built to the Green Community Standard within our program, and approximately 40% more efficient than a typical new construction home. The program is a step above green communities, but is also easily achievable as it does not require significant modification to the home design. Some of our development partners are already building to the standard, as I already mentioned, and homes that are zero energy ready produce significant energy cost savings over the life of the home that makes them more affordable for the occupants that live within them. The policy change would impact homes funded through the Minneapolis Homes program, which typically funds 30 to 60 new construction units in any given year. The Minneapolis Homes Financing Program will continue encouraging development policy minimums through financial and scoring incentives in the funding application process. As Tim spoke to, the city is committed to having homes built to higher standards than the policy minimum. The current funding round is proposed to contain a funding incentive of up to 20% of total development cost of a housing unit, not to exceed $90,000, to build homes that are certified as either passive or net zero. And to clarify, net zero is not the same as zero energy ready and is a step above the Zero Energy Ready Homes program, where the home achieves net zero energy use. Based upon the passive study completed by INTEP, the amount to upgrade a home to passive net zero costs approximately $65,000, and then there are some additional costs of the energy rating and certification plus architectural design work that can add some more cost to that. The passive study also demonstrated that passive home and net zero home design requirements are not universally known amongst the general contracting community. One goal of this incentive is to increase the amount of homes built to either standard so that more general contractors and developers become aware of the building methods. Because most general contractors don't currently build ultra-efficient homes, the cost of building tends to be higher. As more homes are built and familiarity increases, those costs should continue to go down. CPED staff will be reviewing homes built under the incentive and new policy requirements no less than every 5 years. The goal is to eventually have all homes built through the program be either passive or net zero. Developers can and should work with an energy rater to ensure compliance with sustainability policies. Multiple organizations provide services, some of which have partnered with development partners through CPED programs. And some of those organizations they've worked with include Building Knowledge, INTEP Studio, which just spoke previously, Precipitate Architecture, and Center for Energy and the Environment, who I will now be turning the presentation over to speak to compliance with sustainability policy requirements. And Phil is joining us from Center for Energy and Environment. Phil, if you haven't done so, please dial *6 on your phone so that you can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm Phil Anderson with Center for Energy and Environment. I'm going to go a little brief overview of the RESNET HERS ratings, Energy Star, and Zero Energy Ready. Just kind of walk through some of the policy changes Kevin just talked about. So yeah, we do HERS ratings and Energy Star ratings and Zero Energy Ready ratings with some of the developers already working in Minneapolis. So just kind of speak to the changes there. If you can go to the next slide. So first off is RESNET HERS rating index. It's usually done with 1 to 3 visits by our HERS energy rater. We got framing inspections. We're hopping in before any installation is done. Just checking any air leaks, stuff like that before the house is insulated and covered up. And we're doing a pre-installation or installation inspection or pre-drywall inspection. So we're checking for any other anomalies, missed opportunities, stuff like that to make sure house gets, see what's at, rate the installation, see how the installation looks before it's covered up. And then final testing, HERS rating, they're doing a blower door duct testing and then documenting all the appliances and putting that into a HERS index. That system is usually modeled through a software. It's either REM rates or Ecotrope, the two common ones here in Minnesota. And that chart on the right is the HERS index there. And I'll kind of get that next slide. We'll kind of cover more of what that is. But the 0 is a home that uses zero energy, and the HERS 100 is a reference home built like 2004 standards.
And
So,
Phil,
yeah,
it seems like we have a little
energy.
bit of a delay. So I'm gonna just skip the slides ahead. Try to do it a couple seconds before you transition.
Perfect. So yeah, it's a way to compare the energies between homes. The HERS index of 2004, then a 0 is no energy used. Typical home built today in Minnesota can score between 45 and 60. And then last year in 2019, of the 7,200 homes that were rated, the average score in Minnesota was about a HERS 50. And you can find more information there at resnet.us. And next I'm going to get into this Energy Star New Homes program. So that's what currently is the policy for single-family homes in Minneapolis. That's an EPA-sponsored program, New Homes program. You have the builder and HVAC contractor go through a training program to be eligible to build these. We have the HVAC contractor is required to properly size the systems, resulting in better comfort. So they're doing manual J, which is a load calculation, and J, D, and S for the building to make sure all those systems are properly sized and the ventilation's okay for the house. And there's 3 key checklists that are followed as well. So you have the thermal enclosure checklist, the HVAC design and quality installation that the HVAC contractor is following, and you have the water management checklist, which the builder is following. And as a HERS rater, that the thermal enclosure checklist is just going over air leaks and bypasses. There are just issues in the house that could be overlooked, so making sure all that stuff's followed properly there. Then one good thing about Energy Star, does have excellent brand recognition, and it's a good way for builders to set themselves apart from other builders. You can find more at that website there. Next, I'm going to get into the new policy that they're talking about for DOE Zero Energy Ready Homes. So this program builds off Energy Star New Homes checklist. So you're still following all those exact checklists and prescriptions for that program with the HERS rating and everything. And then these homes are at least 40 to 50% more efficient than new homes. And their Energy Star qualified appliances and fixtures are required. So fridges, washers, dishwashers must be Energy Star qualified appliances. And then their U value for your windows and solar heat gains are a little higher than a code window for the Minnesota just code. So it's encouraging better windows package there. There are some minimums there, but you can definitely go way beyond that as well. And then you're meeting the IECC 2015 code levels for insulation. So in Minnesota, we're loosely following the 2012 IECC currently. So this kind of jumps it up quite a bit for that. So something you definitely want to check on, make sure you're hitting those levels as well. So that's the whole shell of the envelope of the building. Those levels are going up quite a bit there. Then the ductwork inside the envelope is the big thing with the HVAC system. So making sure all of that ductwork is inside the shell of the thermal boundary of that house, the heating and cooling boundaries. So you're not running ductwork in the attic or garages or other crawl spaces to really keep all that heating and cooling contained within that home. And other things on the Zero Energy Ready is the hot water distribution. So you're designing that system to provide rapid hot water to the homeowner. So you're, this could be stacked plumbing, could be just a little more thought needs to be put in. And typically the home sizes we're seeing for these houses that are built through these programs it's easy to achieve just by a good plumbing design and distribution. But it's definitely requires some thought up front, and you can't just have your plumber come in and just throw in their normal maybe plumbing system. They need to just think about the size of all those systems. We're measuring the water, hot water delivery temperature at the furthest fixture in the house to ensure it meets that. This can also be achieved through a pump. They have different automated or sensor pumps that you can set up to meet this goal as well. And then the other big kind of change here for Zero Energy Ready homes is the indoor air quality certifications through the Indoor Air Plus EPA program. So A lot of this consists of things that are already in the code, but it's essentially just really trying to protect that inside air environment of the home. So the products, low VOCs, the paints and glues and wood products, everything that's going in the house, that's kind of be the biggest change, is mostly the products you're putting in. So it's really a matter of looking over this list, working with your lumber yards, your distributors to make sure you're putting in these products that aren't off-gassing horribly, because the whole point of these homes now is to build them tighter and then ventilate them, very well also. So that's something to be aware of. We have to follow that program too. And then making the home PV ready if the client has significant solar insulation. So, a lot of times it's just based on a lot, based on whatever's there. You need to make it at least PV ready for the program. So it's not really, there's no mandatory requirement for PV, but it's certainly encouraged. But just making it PV ready is not that hard to do at that time of construction, because just given the way the trends of solar energy, being a lot more cost effective these days, it's probably just going to keep getting cheaper and cheaper. So it's good to at least make it ready. There's more info there at the website listed below to kind of give you some more background on that. And this next slide I'm going to talk about here is kind of a little chart Kevin showed earlier. We're talking about the Minnesota on the left here. We have the 2012 IECC. Is loosely based on Minnesota code. Here we have some walls are a little different, some foundation walls are a little different. We already require balanced ventilation here in Minnesota. You jump up to Energy Star, you have a little lower HERS score, but then they also have mandatory requirements for the IECC 2009 as a backdrop for all features of that home. That's IECC 12 for a lot of the goals you're comparing against on that. You have independent verification, water management, and then HVAC quality installation with whole house ventilation is required for both Energy Star and Zero Energy Ready. So when you get into that HERS, Zero Energy Ready, that HERS score is going to go down. You have, again, that 2015 ICC enclosure, so the insulation package on that home is going to be a lot better. Optimized duct location inside that house, the indoor air, energy efficient distribution of the water, and then solar ready are the key takeaways from this. I'm going to go over a couple examples now too of the some different homes. The first one here, once this slide pops up for you, is an affordable housing project in Kalamazoo Valley for Habitat for Humanity in Michigan. This is a 1,000 square foot slab on grade, 3-bedroom, 1-bath, 1 floor. It's little different climate zone, but anyways, at a HERS 46 on this one. The average monthly bill is calculated at $60 a month. And then here's the slide. The annual savings is $450 calculated versus new homes. And then for the first 20 or 30 years, there's estimated a savings of $20,900. So again, that's not huge savings in this home, but it's definitely significant savings for that. Makes it more affordable for these housing types that are built here. And I got one more example here of another Habitat for Humanity out of Hartford, Connecticut. That's a 3-bedroom, 1,280 square foot home, 1.5 bath on 2 floors. And this one did have solar on it and came in at a -7 for the HERS scores, meaning it produced more energy than it was using. About a $10 average monthly energy bill in this home. There is $4,000 annual savings, and then estimated in the first 30 years, including the fuel escalation rates, they're guessing about $167,000 in savings there just on energy use. So just a couple examples of some award winners through this program that have been built for the affordable housing over the last few years. All right, and the last thing I'm going to talk about engaging with the HERS rater. So the HERS rater is a key thing to all these different programs here, just engaging with someone early on to, in this design process when you're going to build a home. It's good to get someone on board early on to go through the different programs, walk through all the different parameters you have to hit, the different trainings and what you have to sign up for, and then doing a projected rating to find out if that home achieves the performance that's required by these different programs. So there are certain HERS target scores you're going to have to hit. There's different requirements you have to hit on different systems you're putting in the house, and testing thresholds you need to achieve as well. So verifying that early on is very important there. And then finding out what trade-offs can be made. So are there different, is it easy, you could maybe insulate more on the walls, exterior walls, and then maybe didn't need as much in that basement wall assembly or the slab. So just kind of some trade-offs there depending on what your budget is. And then going through those requirements, the specs, and the expectations with the subs. So really it's key to make these projects successful is to get on, have a detailed spec sheet with your subs, go over that with them, and kind of make their contracts required on them being able to achieve these goals for these different programs, as this is not just your average code built home. And we definitely struggle with some contractors and insulators and HVAC technicians out there that don't really understand the differences here, but it's really good to talk about these up front. So some websites there you can locate HERS raters, these different programs. And finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about the incentives that are available. So CenterPoint Energy and Excel both have, they're paying for a HERS rating based on the efficiency of that home. So they have a program with a baseline home, Minnesota home design. So when you do a HERS rating, you can compare those savings on that baseline home versus the home you actually built. So through that HERS rating, the data collection and the testing and the ventilation and the blower door and other testing we're doing at that house, they can find that HERS score and then calculate what kind of % savings better than that baseline home was achieved. So the HERS rater will be the one that submits this to the utility. And then here below, at the bottom here is a chart from CenterPoint Energy's incentives. So anywhere from $500 up to $4,000. If you're going with a zero energy ready home, I'd say our typical builders of those would probably be coming in the 30 to 35%. So over $2,000 per home. So ideally, this is going to cover at least your HERS rater cost and some additional, energy improvement costs there. And we've definitely had some builders go all the way to meet the maximum level as well. So, and we'll say Excel Energy has another program as well for this for all electric homes, and then CenterPoint also has one for nonprofit housing developers. So if our developer was part of a nonprofit organization, there's even further incentives for that. And that's all I had for my portion. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Phil. So today we have discussed the study that INTEP conducted, and then Phil just provided some information on what it means to work with the HERS rater to ensure that you're compliant with the different sustainability program requirements. We also talked about the city's recommendation to increase its minimum green communities requirements for its 1 to 3 unit new construction program to the Zero Energy Ready program. And at this point, we are taking comments and questions, and then from there, the staff will then go to the City of Minneapolis City Council Business Inspections Housing and Zoning Committee on Tuesday, November 17th. So that's the date where city staff will make the recommendations that you're hearing about today to City Council. And then if approved, the policy would then be implemented for the upcoming funding application that is anticipated to come in late 2020. And then projects that are funded in 2021 would implement the Zero Energy Ready standard for 1 to 3 unit new construction projects. So at this point, we're open to and accepting public comments until November 17th. And before we jump into answering any questions that we may have received, I also want to acknowledge all the partners that worked with us. So this presentation, the policy recommendation, and the study involved the work of multiple CPID staff and outside entities. And I want to thank our staff for the input and guidance, and especially want to thank Greater Metropolitan Housing Corporation, who worked with us during this study to modify one of their home designs and bid it out to the general public. So the information that INTEP studied was based on gimmicks working with us to bid out that project. And then I want to thank INTEP for the work in drafting the report and continuing to push the city toward achieving higher goals of energy efficiency in building design. And then also want to thank the Center for Energy and Environment for their willingness and support in providing information on homes, how homes are measured, and can achieve these guidelines. And then also the architectural firm Cermak Rhodes, which has recently merged with LHB, for their willingness to allow us to modify a home that they designed for this study. Additionally, multiple public stakeholder groups and individuals have provided a wealth of information and input that went into this policy formation, and I want to thank everyone for their efforts, and then also thank those who are willing to provide comments or feedback on this policy recommendation today. So with that, we have a couple ways that you can submit your comments or questions. We have a chat feature through this, and I think we have received some comments and questions so far. And then we also have our email address, mplshomes@minneapolismn.gov, and we'll receive any comments or questions you have. Any questions and answers will be posted to the CPED items for public review webpage, which is also where this policy recommendation lives currently. And that is linked on this slide. And then the presentation will also be posted publicly on the webpage. So now I think we're going to have Roxanne Kimball take the lead in reviewing the questions and then sharing them, and then we'll try to answer them with the time that we have remaining.
Hi, everyone. This is Roxanne Young-Kimball. So we have 5 different questions that I can see we've received. We're just going to work through them in order of receipt. So the first one was, and this is a question for you, Tim, from INTEP. Can you explain why Zero Energy Ready Home is grayed out? It was quick and we missed it. And I believe this is a reference to slide 17 from in the slide deck, the one that was looking at standard home versus energy consumption.
Sure. Can you hear me, actually?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Okay. That was grayed out because the model home that we used for the study didn't comply in all aspects with that building standard for no other reason, but we were able to model it nonetheless because we knew what the differences were. So in our energy modeling, we were able to capture it, but we wanted to be transparent about it. So the model that we used to do our analysis didn't comply in every aspect with that standard, and therefore it's only put there in spirit as a placeholder for that category. Okay.
Great, thank you, Tim. The next question is, why wasn't an independent consultant commissioned to do this report? There seems to be a conflict of interest. Kevin, can you speak to the procurement process that was done for the report?
Yes, so we did actually do a process where we developed a scope of work that was then posted publicly, and we did receive 2 2 organizations that submitted proposals, and CPED staff did a standard review process that resulted in INTEP being hired to complete the report. So there was a process where individuals or organizations could apply to prepare the report.
Great, thank you. Next, this is a question for you, Kevin. Can the presenter identify a particular incentive that would support Passive House in Minnesota? IPCC already identified Passive House as a leading method to transform local building industries.
So if I'm understanding the question, perhaps I might need you to repeat it. The question is, can we identify a reason to support passive? Is that what I heard?
The framing was, can the presenter identify a particular incentive that would support Passive House in Minnesota? And so I think speaking to the funding incentive that we're proposing would be a response.
Oh, yes. Thank you. I appreciate that. So the city is proposing as part of our upcoming notice of funding availability application to include an incentive for either passive housing or net zero energy or net zero housing. So that are the two higher standards above the Zero Energy Ready program. And that incentive would allow for a developer that intends to exceed the minimum policy requirement of the city to build to either passive or zero energy or net zero by applying for either up to 20% of the total development costs or up to $90,000. And that cost would be to cover the improvement costs. So as INTEP featured in their study, it cost about $65,000 to go from current green communities to passive. And then there are some additional costs that come along with the certification process. And so that is what that passive or net zero incentive would be for specifically.
Great, thank you, Kevin. This next question is similar, but I think has enough differences that we should go ahead and publish it as well. First, there was a question, will these slides be available afterwards, especially the finer print ones? We will be posting this entire presentation on the public website where we have recommendations posted. Second, there was a question, my husband and I currently have a tiny house in Northeast Minneapolis that we plan to demolish. We'd love to build the first zero energy ready home in Minneapolis. Is there any funding available to help make this happen? Kevin, do you want to field that question as well?
Yes. So we do plan on having an upcoming application process where individuals or developers can apply for funding to build a new construction property on either a privately owned site or a city-owned site. There are some requirements that come along with that program. And some of those include income qualification and not a net loss in units on the property. And then we also have some affordability mechanisms that come in place depending on where the property is within the city of Minneapolis. So our funding is restricted in certain ways. I think for that particular proposal, it might make sense for the individual to reach out to us directly, and they can do that through the mplshomes@minneapolismn.gov email address, and we can talk more about specific proposals that way.
Great, thank you. Next question, will there be a tiered program so the more you do, the more you qualify for? Kevin, I think that's another question for you.
Yes, so the question about tiering the funding. So our incentive that we are proposing for passive net zero is based upon need. So a developer would submit a pro forma of costs, and we would evaluate their application based upon that pro forma to determine the amount of funding that they're requesting. And then we would review it to make sure it's in line with kind of the estimates that we've seen and that the numbers are sensible. And so it's not necessarily a tier of funding, it's more based on demonstrated need. And then our program itself also provides funding for gap financing to develop new construction properties as well. And that uses the similar metric that we evaluate proposals based on a pro forma that's submitted.
Great, thank you. Another question for you, Kevin. Will there be an increase in funding for the new Zero Energy Ready Home standard?
There isn't an increase in funding for the Zero Energy Ready Home standard itself. The city included CEE's presentation in particular to demonstrate that there are offsets that developers can apply for either from Centerpoint or Excel to help cover the cost. And one reason that the city is recommending that we go from the green communities requirement to the zero energy ready homes requirement is because the jump in doing that is less significant than passive and significantly less expensive. So also more achievable broadly by the broader development community, so that that cost doesn't have significant impact on the ability to continue to produce affordable housing within the city.
Tim, this is a question for you. Did the study look at embodied carbon in addition to operational? If not, how will Minneapolis account for incentivizing reducing embodied carbon?
Well, I can only speak to the first part. So in this study, we've conducted other studies that looked at the embodied carbon. There's actually quite a bit of information available online in various places where I'm happy to steer somebody if they want to go deeper on that. But I can't speak to the incentives there. I would like to offer a comment, though, that embodied carbon is certainly an issue that we also need to tackle in the building industry. But the real mountain before us at the moment is operational carbon. And tackling embodied carbon before we tackle or we figure out how to tackle the operational carbon would be the tail wagging the dog. So first we got to get the operational carbon out of the building, because that is an ongoing and continuous burden, whereas the embodied carbon is a one-time burden. And also, depending on how they're built, these buildings here, stick frame mostly, wood frame, light wood frame, actually very light on the embodied carbon footprint based on the right materials. And so it's not really an issue just yet. It is an issue, but I think that is a second line after we conquer this first. And with that, I'm happy to let Kevin talk about any incentives that they might have in mind.
All right. So Kevin, was there anything that you wanted to add?
I don't think I have anything at this point. I don't know if Kim has thoughts specifically on the embodied carbon question.
Yeah, no, I would just say I'd echo what Tim has already said. We are looking at, embodied carbon, and there's been some carbon accounting, but we still have quite a task ahead of us just to reduce our ongoing use of energy in the buildings, and certainly going retrofit. But yes, we will be looking at embodied carbon as kind of an update to our climate action plan in 2021. And looking at some strategies and really starting to understand that a little bit more.
Great, thank you. Do zero energy ready homes or passive homes have values that appraise higher? Is our next question. And I can say broadly that was not an element of our study. CEE or INTEP, if you have experience that you could frame just based on your experience, that would potentially be helpful.
Sure. This is Tim from INTEP. Anecdotally, we've seen that there is an increase in appraised value based on energy efficiency. There are tools and mechanisms in the marketplace to force a review of those items and bring that up as something that is given specific consideration during the appraisal. And current appraisals do show that there is value found in those measures. Yes.
Great. Are there any final questions from the audience? Anyone who's on the telephone, you can push *6 in order to ask a question. I'll ask one more time. Anyone else who wants to ask a question? All right, great. Well, thank you everyone for participating. Kevin or Kim, any final closing remarks?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everyone that attended and also that bared with us as we had some of our technology challenges. I hope that the information that we presented today was helpful and that if you have additional thoughts or questions that you would please feel free to share them through the email at Minneapolis Homes at minneapolismn.gov. And we'd be happy to also engage with you if you have questions directly on projects you're thinking about, or if you are interested in our upcoming application that we hopefully will be releasing here in about a month or two. We are happy to talk to you about that as well.
We have one more question that just came in while you were remarking, Kevin. Does the city of Minneapolis plan to incentivize passive homes and higher efficiency by reducing regulatory burdens during plan review? Unfortunately, we don't have any plan reviewers that are part of this call. So what we can do is find out the response to that question by engaging that team, and then we'll post the response along with the responses to the other broader questions.
But I will say we are actively having those conversations, and it's something that's actively being contemplated, in part being informed by the pilot project that we had done with Mr. Ian to get some baseline data about what it would take in a real world project from the regulatory standpoint. We don't have a formal sort of green passport yet for that type of development. Of course, that term has not been trademarked yet, but we are actively working on something. Mr. Havey can speak to it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yes, we have been looking at that, and we would like to see some things being done there and take at least the disincentives out of doing insulated homes. And there are quite a few, just won't go into the details, but, footprint being larger and basing fees on footprint size and things like that. So we'd like to see those improvements made, and we'd like to make, now that we have this policy going forward, we can start really seeing the connection and how we can make a connection better with our zoning and regulatory to be in alignment with our policies. We hadn't had as directive policies across the board on sustainability, so we're looking at trying to improve that by having sustainability policies be kind of front and center in the work that we do, both in economic development and our own enterprise buildings, as well as the housing. So thank you everyone for attending tonight and for participating as well too. I really appreciate it. Please let us know other comments and questions about the policy as well too, and look forward to seeing great progress on energy efficiency as we move forward in 2021. Thank you.